Okay, now why are we here? Why are we here tonight? Well, after the last federal election where Labour got a surprise, I'm trying to find a nice way of putting it, a bit of a surprise kicking in the west of Sydney and in Queensland, they instituted an internal review. And here's one of the key quotes from that review. Quote, "Labour as a whole did not project an image that was appealing to devout Christians." I can tell you as a minister right in the heart of Western Sydney that we had many church members who previously would have been sympathetic to Labour, but on some key issues which we'll discuss tonight, found themselves unable when it came to the ballot box to mark that vote. It's an issue that Labour have recognised in that same report. The topic of Christians and how they voted is mentioned 15 different times and in different ways. It's a key issue, and tonight we've got a chance to examine that. Now, before we get the politicians up to chat about this, what we thought it would be good to do is to set the scene of what Christian engagement with Labour has been like in the past. So I wonder if you will join me in welcoming our first guest tonight, who is Roy Williams. Roy, come and join us at the seat here. Welcome, Roy.
Thank you very much, Dave.
Now, Roy, you're a lawyer by profession. I think it's right, you teach law at University of Sydney, and you're also a historian, written a couple of books, and one of them is very relevant to what we're talking about tonight. What's that book?
It's called In God They Trust, ? It's a set of biographies of all of our prime ministers, from Edmund Barton to Julia Gillard, focusing on their religious beliefs. Okay,
so you might know a little bit about our topic tonight. Do you want to, you've brought your book to shamelessly plug it, so why don't you do that right now? There it is, and I understand there'll be some copies at the back if people want to get that afterwards. Now, Roy, let's tell the story of Christians and Labour. As I understand it, Christians were involved right at the very start of the formation of the Labour Party. What did that look like?
They certainly were. The ALP was founded in the late 19th century by men and women, the vast majority of whom were Christians, and proudly so. My three favourite examples: W.G. Spence, the founder of the Australian Workers' Union and one of the first members of the Federal Parliament, member for Darling; Jim McGowan, the first Labor Premier of New South Wales; and the great Labor Prime Minister Andrew Fisher, now 3 times Prime Minister, up to and including World War I. Now, those 3 men had one thing in common. They were all long-time Sunday school superintendents, and they were all Protestants.
Did you know that the Sunday school movement here started on this very campus under Thomas Hassell?
I did indeed, and I was looking at one of the plaques down the back of the church in his memory.
Yeah. So a big Christian movement involvement, lots of Protestant movement. It's fair to say that, however, over Labour's history, there's been maybe you call it a gradual shakeout at times of Christian engagement. Let's talk about some of those movements. Let's talk about World War I and the first great split there.
Well, World War I was a catastrophe in so many ways, for the Christian churches generally, but certainly for the Labor Party. Billy Hughes, of course, the great Labor rat, split the party in the middle of World War I over the issue of conscription. And he took out with him most of the Protestant parliamentarians. Labor ever since has had a problem with the Protestant churches.
Where did they go?
They went over to Hughes' new party, the Nationalists, so the Conservatives got Hughes to lead the Conservative parties. I mean, until Menzies created the Liberal Party, they had about 6 different names, but they were called the Nationalists in those days.
Okay. So the Protestants, a lot of them left, obviously not all, but a lot of them
Not
left.
all, but too many.
And so would it be right to say that in the 1920s, therefore, more dominated by Roman Catholics? From the
20s until the second great split, Labor was dominated by Roman Catholics.
Yeah, including their leaders?
Well, Scullin, Jimmy Scullin, Prime Minister during the Depression, was arguably the most devout Prime Minister we've ever had, on a personal level. Yeah. Absolutely committed Catholic. Chifley was a Catholic, had a troubled relationship with the Catholic Church. He, of course, coined the light on the hill. the very term that we use from the Gospels, of course. Curtin was a lapsed Catholic, but I believe he converted to some form of Protestantism under the pressures of World War II. So there's three more leaders at the very top who were extremely serious about Christianity.
But a more Roman Catholic flavour. Okay, now the 1950s, another big split. Tell us about that.
Second huge disaster in the history of the Labor Party when B.A. Santa Maria and the groupers split the party again and took out the conservative Catholics. So it had already been weakened religiously and was weakened again. So the DLP kept the coalition in office for 23 years with their preferences, but they were basically Labor votes.
And what do they leave over?
They left over issues of the Cold War, the approach to communism and allegations of infiltration of communists in the Australian trade unions, which was happening, but it wasn't an issue worth splitting the Labor Party about.
Yeah. And so would it be right to say then as that dilutes out, you then get more and more secular politicians, even maybe some people where for the first time you're getting more of an almost anti-church vibe? Is that fair?
Not so much at the top. Certainly in the average ALP voter became far more secular.
Yeah.
And Vietnam was the final straw in the coffin because the churches cheered it on and it became a calamity, and the idealistic left fed up with the churches, but not at the leadership level. I mean, Bob Hawke, of course, was the son of a minister, and he always said his deepest values were owed to his parents, even though he became an agnostic as an adult. Paul Keating was, I believe, a very committed Catholic, still is. Rudd, of course. It's no coincidence that the only election in the last 28 years, the federal level, where Labor's won a majority in the House of Representatives, we were led by a committed, ecumenical, proud Christian.
Yeah.
My thesis is, and it's not just mine, he managed to get that 4 or 5% of the primary vote that you're talking about. They're low-income Christians who are naturally sympathetic to Labor, but who are otherwise turned off. Called the Bonhoeffer effect.
Bonhoeffer effect, yeah. Now, it's interesting to me...
It's true.
It's interesting to me that at the same time as Rudd is there, of course, the story of Rudd is also the story of Gillard, right?
Well, it's a tragedy. It's a tragic story, in my view.
It's an epic, isn't it? And she's almost the opposite.
Well, Julia... I've never spoken to Julia. I have to preface my remarks. I did have a lovely conversation with Kevin Rudd about theology. It was bizarre. But Julia, in fact, her best friend in high school was the daughter of the local Baptist pastor in Adelaide. So she was actually quite steeped in it, and she was quite proud of that. She won prizes at Sunday school. But it's clear she did lose her whatever faith she had, and is the only Prime Minister in our history who has ever said that she's a non-believer.
A non-believer, yeah. And quite clearly on that when she was asked. And that takes us up to the last federal election, and then you had the leaders in both houses, Shorten and Wong. So Wong, obviously, uniting church. I think that's right to say.
I believe so. Yes.
But not huge about it, but prepared to talk about it. Bill Shorten.
Well, Bill Shorten actually wrote a book where he was quite eloquent about his ties in his upbringing to the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
He converted to Anglicanism when he got married.
Yeah.
So Bill Shorten was certainly not anti-Christian, although some of the things he said were possibly misconstrued by some constituents and potential voters in that regard. But it wasn't Bill Shorten's problem. It's a problem the Labor Party's got. I mean, only 8% of Australians go to church regularly, but it's a very important minority vote.
That's right. There are a number of key issues today. What do you think are the most important issues for Christians there's going to be a federal election next year? What do you think are going to be the most, as a social observer, what do you think are the issues they really are caring about now?
Well, it all depends what sort of Christian you are, frankly, and what issues you take from the Gospels as being the most important politically. I mean, if you talk to the ACL, they'll talk only about gays and abortion, and they are very important issues. And I don't agree with most Labor members on those issues. Yeah. But, what are the 4 big issues of practical politics? What really are politicians there for? Distribution of wealth, war and peace, human rights, the environment. They're the big 4. And Labor has a very strong Christian case to make. Christian case, gospel-based case on all 4 of those issues, I would argue. That's what Rudd did in the lead up to the 2007 election. Now, the social issues aren't going to go away, but people who rate those as the most important issues, I think, frankly, Labor has a hopeless task. Hopeless. The one thing they can do is point out the Liberals are basically the same, and secondly, we respect, this is your point, Dave, we respect you if you disagree. It's an honourable position. The idea of, I hated it when I heard that there were moves to tie ALP members of caucus to a vote, the solidarity pledge, which the founders of the Labor Party, by the way, was their big mistake. Joseph Cook argued against it and left the party over it. And there must be room for conscience on those issues for individuals. Absolutely. If the public see, look, the Labor Party's got a lot of libertarians in it, but so does the Liberal Party. But if enough people are allowed to speak their voice, vote their conscience, you can respect that.
Yeah. So that's where we're at. Thank you for that great little overview. You're clearly passionate about the topic, and dare I say, about the Labour Party as well. But that's probably left us really well poised, because that is the question. The image wasn't good, and maybe there's some revisiting of that to do. Roy, I have engaged with your book. It is a great book. It's really worth reading to learn about a whole bunch of characters that I, as a brand new Australian, have enjoyed reading about. You'll have it.
They are a great bunch of characters. Yeah, they really are, on both sides. Yeah.
If you're any form of a political junkie, and I guess that's why you're in the room, right, or watching, then this is a great book to read. Roy, thank you for your time. I know you'll be hanging around afterwards, not just to sell your book, but to talk to people who are interested. Will you thank Roy with me? Thank you, Roy. Will you welcome with me Senator Deborah O'Neill? Welcome, Senator. Thank you. But first of all, let's just get to know you, because too often these political engagements go fisticuffs far too early. Let's get to know you first of all. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You're a Christian. Tell us about your Christian background then.
Well, it's interesting if you determine whether I'm a Christian or not. I did apply when I was married, and my first year on the Central Coast, I applied to a Christian college, and I got a letter back saying, "You're not a Christian, you're a Catholic."
Okay.
So that was a rejection. And I just think that that's a very important reality that we deal with, that the differentiation across the Christian faiths is something that we should not diminish, and we should particularly think about the waves of new Christian faiths that are coming, and we have still a profoundly Eurocentric Christianity, whether it's the hangovers from the sectarian days, which you've heard, ably expressed in the political battles that occurred. But I call myself a Christian, but I am brought up in the Catholic tradition. I was born around the corner from here at Parramatta Hospital to Irish immigrants, Jim and Mary, who had big plans for their life in Australia, very little money, but they came out with hope and dreams, and they had the backup of the church. So my mum always, she tells me about the struggles that they had, and when she says, well, I knew that if things got difficult, I could always go to the priest. And for me to remember that as a person of faith, and to speak to my students and say, when you travel the world, you are immersed in the Catholic tradition. You're children of Catholic families, and you've been part of a Catholic school. If you find yourself in trouble anywhere in the world, the church is there. We're an international organisation, and you're part of it, and you belong to something. So that sense of belonging has been pretty big. I was baptised at St Anthony's at Girraween, at Toongabbie. I went to school at St Anthony's at Girraween. My dad got more work working for the Nepean River County Council, digging trenches, and I ended up down at Campbelltown. And then that was the Good Samaritan nuns. And it's so funny how you feel the hand of God in your life, and for some reason, it's only recently that I really connected that I went to a Good Samaritan school, and how significant for me in my life, in my prayer, in my reflection, and in my manifestation of my own faith in life, that the story of the Good Samaritan is such a powerful one, because it's about a society that's divided, like our society, with hierarchies of who's in and who's out at any particular time. It's a story about need and a capacity to respond to need, about judgment and exclusion and generosity of spirit and heart and wallet, and brokenness, despair, healing, recovery, and hope.
Yeah.
So all of that, there you go. That's a little bit about who I am.
How did you get into politics?
I was actually doing my master's at the Australian Catholic Uni, and my master's is actually a thesis towards a theology of enculturation for young people. Okay. So I did a lot of reading, and it was because I could see such yearning and heartbrokenness and spiritual need in my students. I really wanted to think about that. And I was driving back one night. It was about 1996. Early in 1996, I can remember, because I would have fallen pregnant that month, I think, with our third child. He's turning 25 on Sunday. And as I was driving along, I heard Paul Keating speaking to his staff. I already knew that my version of the world, my faith-informed and infused and enlivened version of the world, was calling me to an option for the poor and a model of service and care for others that could only be expressed through Labor policy. I knew I belonged in the Labor Party. And when Paul Keating spoke to his staff, and he spoke of the things that had been achieved and the path that had been set for the benefit of many across the nation, and I think if superannuation was the only thing that got done, the transformation of our capacity to live a different kind of retirement life, the wealth of our nation, the capacity for that, for future generations to build and share wealth in a way that is generous and open-hearted and invitational. If that was the only thing he did, I would have signed up. But there was so much more. So that's it. I said, I'm ringing up the Labor Party. But that's when it gets interesting for your group. Was it? Well, yes, and it wasn't particularly welcoming. So I rang the next day. I rang head office, found the number 9207 2000. That's the number. I've rung it many times since. And I got somebody, who told you to ring?
Really? Do you know what? Let you into a secret. Sometimes the church welcome can be like that as well.
And there's a reason for it.
Tell me.
Well, in both contexts, there is fear. There is uncertainty about the other. Yeah. There is power, because it operates in every interaction. And there is an effort at control of the complex and uncertain world that a new person might bring. So when you put all that together, there can be suspicion. It's very short-sighted, because a welcome for everyone is obviously going to grow your movement and grow your congregation. But we are flawed, and our systems are flawed, and we don't always get it right. So I got the neg, but I did get the fact that Kincumber branch met on it was the third Wednesday of the month, I think, at that point, and I showed up at the Kincumber branch, and I walked in, and the meeting was just about to start, and a few people looked at me, and then they all sat down. I thought, it's time to sit. So I sat down, and one wag, who's not with us now, David Humphreys, says to me, "Well, who sent you, and when are you going to run for Parliament?"
Nice. When did you run for Parliament?
Same. Well, not straight away, believe me. I had no idea. I mean, I had no connection with the Labor Party. My father used to speak to Bob Hawke through the television. That was it. That was as close as we got to politics. And when I did join, and people went, "Oh, okay, well, she'd probably be pretty good at doing the minutes. She's a teacher, she's pretty organised." So bit by bit, you get a few jobs, and people see that you're competent, and then they begin your local people who get to know you, they begin to trust you. But, people further up the food chain, it's like, well, what's going on in the Kincumber branch, So you have this deep suspicion becomes a part of what you have to encounter. So it wasn't always welcoming. And of course, when you contest ideas, and that is what you do in a political party. Just because you're in a party doesn't mean you agree with everything that everybody delivers as the platform. And you live with that tension. There is contest between people, and you're either able for that or you're not, because it might not be your thing. But I'm assuming if people are here and they're thinking it might be their thing, there are so many ways to contribute to policy, and so many ways to participate in your branch, and so many ways to be active for your community with other people who care in the same way that you do. And I've found it quite surprising and really delightful that people I met in the Labor Party, I actually started to see every single month, they became like another family for me. And I can think of, going out door knocking with the wonderful Royce Cummins, who was a unionist with the Plumbers Union. And he was such this vibrant, active man, but he became very unwell, and he had surgery, and he had to have a colostomy bag, and he couldn't walk anymore. So he drove me. He drove me to door knocking spots on the acreages, which were 2.5 acres. So we were quicker doing it that way. He did everything he could until he passed. And going to his funeral, his daughter, Narelle, now comes and hands out for him. And I see these people in my local community. They are my Labor family. And some of them are Catholic, some of them are Christian. And some of them are nothing, and some of them are strident atheists. And there is enough. There's enough in the language, in the ideas, in the history, and the hope of what a Labor set of values can bring to the benefit of community that binds us.
I love to hear people's stories, but we have to kick people out before closing time tonight, and actually send you to
we should be in an Irish pub locked in for a long conversation.
Do the lock-in. Let me push you through. So how did you end up standing for Parliament? When was that? And was that straight to the Senate? Or
No. So 1996 was the join, learn, etc. I had 3 children. My husband and I were both teachers. He also ran a small business, so it was, just keep up with the kids and make sure there's food on the table type situation. In 2003, though, I did run for the state seat of Terrigal, and I thought that the local member was very lazy and entitled, which is kind of how I perceive a lot of the Liberal Party, and I have found that to be the case, and I door knocked like crazy, and thousands, like tens of thousands of houses, and I won on the night. But the postal vote was not a really well-financed one. It was the cheap version, I found out, and I lost by 272 votes out of 45,000. And that was very, very significant for me in my personal growth. And without my faith, that was, so many things happen in your life that are challenging.
Was that a big knock, was it?
Oh, yeah. I loved school. I've had a successful life. It was a first failure mode. It was pretty public. Yeah. So you have to deal with that. And I was ready for the transition. I'd managed all the transitions of my life quite smoothly. Well, this one was whack. Yeah. Legs out from underneath you. How do you deal with that? And I was kind of like, after it was all over and you clean up and you look after everybody, then there's sort of the paralysis of, oh my God, how do I restart my other life? I was so committed to this transition. Mm-hmm. And I'm not an anxious person. But I'm pretty sure there were about 4 weeks there where I was as close to being depressed as anybody could be in their life. I never had a diagnosis. I never was unable to function, but it really knocked me. And I thought, this is a great way for me to understand what it's like for people who do feel paralysed, who do feel so diminished for whatever reason that they can't actually get up. Of course, there's the mental side of it, but then we've got the physiological side to genuine depression, and I certainly didn't have that. So it was an episodic response to the challenge. That turned out to be such a gift, and I prayed about it, and I thought, well, God, where do you want me? What do you want me to do? And I think of a hymn that we used to sing, and I didn't know what an ambassador was. I've met a few since. I didn't know what an ambassador was, and I remember we used to sing, "Go now, you are sent forth as Christ's ambassador. By serving him in those we meet, we love him more and more." And I loved that song, and I loved the word ambassador, even though I didn't really know what it meant. And as I found out about what that means, I think that that's a bit of a signature for how I live my faith in my world, in my family, in my community, and in my party. I am who I am. I don't pretend to be anything else, and I have found a home and success and a welcome in the Labor Party, even at times at odds with other colleagues whose voice might get more media, but I'm there and I'm not alone.
Just a moment ago, you were very positive about being part of the Labour Party, surprise, surprise. But as a Christian, what have you found is the hardest part of being part of a political party? Can't all be easy.
I don't know that the parts that are hard in being in a political party are because of me being a Christian.
Okay.
The parts that are hard about being in the political party are the power struggles that occur, and the fact that you think of any workplace that you're in, there are people with whom you very comfortably align and you share values and it's easy, and there are people with whom you might respect what they do, but there's no connection. So that's the workplace tensions of being in a political party for me are very similar to the workplace tensions you might find in a school or another community. So being a person of faith in my party is not hard for me. And maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm supposed to feel like it's hard because that's the perception that people have, that it's hard to be a person of faith in the party. But there are people of faith in the party. I mean, I know that runs against the narrative that you hear, but it is the truth. We are there. Are there enough of us? No, come join us.
Okay.
Right? That's the reality. We need to be renewed by people of Christians who could get a job at the Christian school, unlike me.
Yeah.
We don't need a whole lot more Catholics, although come on if you want to. We need people who aren't Catholics to come and join our party. We have people of the Islamic faith joining us. We've got Jewish people with us. We need more Christians, because if you are like me and you hear the gospel the way that I do, your home is the Labor Party.
And you are a member of the National Policy Forum, is that right?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so right at the heart of it, here's what the SBS News website said. They stated, quote, 24th of May, straight after the election, social conservatism was another factor cited by experts and insiders for the party's loss of supporters. And then they quote Western Sydney University political scientist Andy Marks, who had predicted a Labour win, along with the polls, I think, as well, who said, these are his words, "The results are startling and unheard of. We haven't seen anything like this in recent electoral history," he told SBS News. On average, we've calculated a 3.3% swing against Labour across all Western Sydney seats, which is pretty unheard of, especially given where the pre-polling momentum was heading. The SBS website sums up some of the worst swings occurred in the most rusted-on Labour seats. And of course, here in Western Sydney, very much so here in the local seat of Parramatta, a real swing as well. So, what happened at the last federal election? And dare I say it, what went wrong?
So Hugh will be joining us, and he'll be able to speak much more particularly to the Western Sydney context, but the sort of passion and energy that you read that with, and the heat that's embedded in the sort of culture wars sells papers.
It's certainly what we were hearing.
Oh, absolutely, and you'll continue to hear it, and I don't deny that it's a reality. But sometimes things are a little simpler than that might be that kind of perception that's been generated and retold. I can tell you that prior to the election, about 6 or 7 weeks before, Bishopstead was in touch with me because I was speaking with some communities of faith, and that's something I do want to come back to. and said that they had sent a letter seeking a response from the Labor Party to a series of questions. There were 6 questions. They were important questions, people needed an answer. Well, the way that filtered into the Labor Party was it ended up in the leader's office, let me tell you, the leader of the opposition doesn't have the same sort of resources of government. And people don't understand how limited those resources are and how they might be allocated. So 6 weeks out, this became a bit of an issue, and he contacted me, and I went and I found the letter. There was a standard response that had gone out. It didn't answer the questions in a way that gave the answers.
Sure.
So then the work had to be done. So I did that work and went down and got the facts and checked in with Tanya Plibersek about what was our position about the right to employ teachers in school. She had already stated on the floor of Parliament. I pulled out the section from Hansard, put it in. I know that is counterfactual to what everybody thinks, but that is the reality. It was committed prior to the last election on the floor of Parliament by our education shadow. That went into Michael Stead's responses. These 6, all clear, all clean. 3 ticks originally turned into 6 ticks when the work was done carefully and the response. I thought that we'd got the truth out there. Then I talked quite frequently with Mark Spencer, who's the head of the Christian schools, and a letter came to Mr Shorten's office on the Friday before the election. Now, the reality is, on the Friday before the election, with the few people that we have, the resources of that office are spread across the entire country, chasing votes everywhere. There is no serious office to deal with that kind of inquiry. It came in at the last minute. The government are well equipped to respond. They responded to those questions. The questions were slightly extended from the ones that Bishop Stead had sent. There was no response. That was the Friday. By the following Tuesday, Wednesday, there was a flurry of newsletters going out which were not responded to by Mr Shorten's office. In that void, like that simple practical challenge, a whole lot of misinformation was allowed to really spread because of failure of the Labor Party. So I don't want to blame the Christian schools because they did what they could with what they had, and they made an assumption, and we've had this conversation since, that there was a capacity to respond in a timely way, in a way that they needed at that point of time. That breakdown happened because relationships of trust between communities of faith and the party just weren't there. So when you've got no currency, things like that can happen.
Do you think possibly even at the time, I can't speak for now, but at the time, also indicative of a culture within the leadership and the leadership office that didn't pick up that was an important thing to be engaging with? So not just that it wasn't someone's role, but somebody somewhere opens the mail, right? And I assume it didn't go in the bin because you found it eventually. Yeah. So somebody somewhere opens the mail and triages. Either they'll triage according to whatever instructions they've been given, or they'll triage according to the culture and just who they are. So yeah, no job, but still a culture that didn't respond to that.
Yes, well, if the culture values it, then it allocates the resources to it. But clearly there was a gap. There was a gap there, and I think really there was the result. But there is also the dedication to re-engagement. And perhaps, sometimes I've described that hard thing happening to me and losing that 2003 election. There's an awakening of something new in you. And I think that Labor's certainly been awakened. And I have to say that I believe amongst my colleagues that there has been a recovery of engagement and the prizing of engagement with communities of faith.
In the review noted this. It said the most pronounced swings against Labour were among those devout first-generation migrant Christians, the very ones who are more, on average, more active. Let me add another observation and ask you a question. I went, for the first time in my life, I went to a protest a couple of years ago, and it was on the abortion issue, and I was actually staggered. There were very few Christians in the protest. It was mainly those very same communities, those immigrant Mediterranean and Middle Eastern Christian communities out in force on that issue, on abortion. They were out again on euthanasia. They actually still care passionately about the marriage debate and marriage issues and the language and tone around it. Is it possible Labour has still got a lot of work to do? Because one of the conversations tonight will be about, well, what's most important for these people. It does seem like some of these key issues, this is still very, very important for them.
Well, those issues are issues of relevance to all people, whatever faith,
Sure.
whatever country, whatever you come. They're issues of importance in every party. And the issues that you've talked about there, the changes that have happened in New South Wales in those two areas of abortion and in euthanasia, have happened when they were advanced in the Parliament with the enablement of Liberal governments.
Yeah.
Right. So I resent is probably the word.
Yeah.
Permanently being positioned as, you know, those bad Labor people who oppose all these conservative things. There are people in Labor who fought tooth and nail alongside those communities against abortion and euthanasia. We are there. And in the Liberal Party, there were people who were fighting for it. So this binarism, you know, Liberal Party, Conservative with you, Labor Party, Progressive not with you, is a false binary.
On that cold night in Martin Place,
Yes.
It was, again, I'll read from your review, the devout first-generation migrant Christians who had the signs, love them both, love the mother, love the child.
Yes.
And they were the ones where there were the most pronounced swings. Sorry, I feel like I've came back to my same argument from before.
But with the reason we do that, and we are having this same argument, and we are going around, because it's fundamental.
Sure.
You know, the life issues about which we are passionate, they exercise us. And, you know, you don't lose your commitment to a fundamental belief that, you know, life begins at conception. If that's what you believe and you hold, you just don't lose that.
But is that almost existential, therefore, for the Labour Party, given that these critical segments of the electorate that you lost at the last federal election, they're not out on the streets for these other issues, but they're out on the streets for this issue where they perceive the Labour Party is not with them.
Yes.
It's fundamental,
but there's
right?
perception.
Sure.
So when did the Liberal governments actually prevent abortion and euthanasia? When did that happen? Because I missed that if that happened. Right. So this again, it's tension, this determination to make this binary. You know, one good, one bad, 4 legs good, 2 legs. You know, it just doesn't hold water.
There's this narrative, isn't there, however, that Christians are inherently socially and economically conservative. And so therefore, when you're against that position, you're somehow non-Christian, and I don't mean in a Roman Catholic sense. So there's that, that's the narrative that needs to be broken here, right? That's what you guys are struggling with, I guess. Last time round, it was the backwash from the same-sex marriage debate.
Yep.
This time round, it's going to be, and we'll discuss it in our panel, it's going to be the religious freedom debate that I think will take centre stage, and the questions around gender issues and so on. Are you going to be back in the same mess, a slightly different flavour, but the same issues being raised?
How we are going to be painted is really very significantly beyond our control. I mean, we're talking into what you've already described as this set of binaries, which is, I hope I conveyed to you, is a false set. Nonetheless, there will be an effort from Mr Turnbull, who has now promised this legislation for nearly 5 years.
Morrison.
Oh, sorry. Well, it's hard to keep up, really, isn't it?
Rod Gillard.
Yeah.
Okay.
So 3 terms, 3 prime ministers. You know,
Sure.
it's not easy to remember, frankly. So we have this situation with Mr Morrison having played the divisive card, pushed it, said that we're going to have this legislation in a bipartisan way. Right, that was his commitment. I will move towards religious freedom in a bipartisan way. Well, that simply didn't happen. The first draft got dropped without any consultation with anybody. It was a bit of a shock to the synagogue. You know, they got notice 24 hours before that it wasn't going to be a meeting for discussion. It was the drop of the first draft. Then we get the second draft after 7,000 submissions which weren't made public. The second draft drops, and that's it. It sits in a drawer. Was not a priority for Mr Morrison. I mean, he might still have been exercising his own faith and going through that personal journey, but as the politician who promised a particular set of policies around religious freedom, he was off the job. Nothing happened until Michaelia Cash came into the role, and then, oh look, it's getting pretty close to the election, bit of agitation, we need to honour this commitment, and the work started to get done with, you know, a lot of provocation. In May, I was asking, who have you consulted with? I asked the Attorney General point blank at estimates, who have you consulted with? They couldn't answer because they weren't doing any consulting. The consulting happened very quickly for a very complex piece of legislation that interacts with state legislation. It's happened with great haste.
So when do you think the consultation started? I do remember being involved in some conversations a number of years back.
Yes, but that created two different pieces of legislation. That is not this.
Yeah.
So this piece of legislation is the third one. Again, not bipartisan, despite the promise. There was no consultation. There was invitation. Mark Dreyfus is on the record, his letters being exchanged. I tried to facilitate it as best as I could to try and bring it all together. But when you smell votes by taking a path that is divisive, and power is operating, and it is about holding government, then I think religion's just got sacrificed.
In what way did religion get sacrificed?
Well, the fact that it sat in that bottom drawer for a very long period of time without any consultation, without any careful work, without any of the things that were recommended by the Australian Law Reform Commission, without proper consultation and referral to the Ruddock report. There's just this gap in time. And then come June, all of a sudden there's a bit of activity. We end up with something being developed. I mean, this is a piece of legislation that is so important to us as people of faith. It is the last bit to round out the religious discrimination set.
Why is it important? Talk us through
Well, it's a fundamental human right. And, you know, Labor as a party of government is committed to the international conventions. You know, we were there when they were getting written. There is no doubt in the Labor Party about our conventions, our commitment to those conventions.
So despite the story of how it's got here, now it's on the floor, you guys will support it?
Well, we couldn't actually have a look at the legislation until the second week of sitting. It was impossible for us to see it. It didn't happen to come to us until it was on the floor. Same thing, the backbenchers were being asked to discuss it from the Liberal Party. They hadn't seen it either. So the chaos of how this has been advanced is manifesting itself in the Liberal Party, and the fact that it was coming to the floor, it wasn't coming to the floor, it was being advanced, this was in, that was out, etc. Thursday was madness in the Senate. Finally, there'd been an agreement to have one inquiry into it through the Human Rights Committee, which is a joint parliamentary committee with members of the House and the Senate together. That's all set up, it starts to run, submissions due the 21st of December, first hearing 21st of December, the next one's 13th and 14th of January. And then in some bizarre move in the Senate, Senator Ruston, who was the manager of opposition business for the government, stood up and agreed to a Greens amendment to set up an additional inquiry in the Legal and Constitutional Committee of the Senate.
Well, all right.
How on earth
You
that
didn't get to
happened?
debate it in Parliament yet, properly, examine it, but
No,
we might have a conversation about it here and now. And see the segue I did there? To have a proper conversation, we'll need to invite the rest of our panel members up.
That's great.
So let's invite them up. First, will you please welcome Dr. Hugh McDermott, who's the State Member for Prospect. Hugh, why don't you come and join us on the middle seat there? Grab your microphone. Welcome. Hugh, let's do a really brief intro. I'll get your answers to some of the political questions in a minute. Tell us very briefly, what's your Christian faith? What's your church background?
Okay, my father was Catholic. My mother is a Baptist. So I grew up in actually both traditions.
Yep.
So I was one of the few kids at my school who went to Mass and went to Bibles and went to Sunday school. Right. I even started teaching Sunday school when I was about 12. So there was that. So I had the liturgy and the strong traditions of 2,000-year tradition of the Catholic faith. At the same time, I had very immersed in Scripture and the understanding of the Baptist Church. So that was my grow up. At 18, I decided to be confirmed in the Catholic Church and was. I was searching for what my vocation was. At that time, I thought perhaps it was the priesthood. I came down to Sydney eventually and worked for Cardinal Edward Clancy and for a time, but I realised that wasn't my vocation. What my vocation was very much led by church social teaching. That was my key, and it is today. It permeates everything I do. And so after a couple of years working for the Archdiocese of Sydney, I went to work for the trade union movement. And I did that for a number of years, starting up with the Federated Ironworkers in Newcastle. And if you know your history, the ironworkers were the first union to kick the communists out of the union movement on the shipyards in Sydney and built from there. And so that was a key part of who I was, and it will build on from there. So that is my tradition of where I've come from with my faith. Over many years, that has guided in all the professional actions I've done and what I've done and gone on to do.
When did you end up in Parliament? Just very briefly now, Hugh.
So I was elected to Parliament in 2015. I represent the seat of Prospect.
You're my local member.
I am.
I
You're very lucky. You're very lucky. As am I. I'm very lucky. So,
Thank you.
We're very lucky, the both of us, where we live, because we live in the seat of Prospect, which goes from southern Blacktown across to Toongabbie, all the way down to Fairfield West, and across to Bosley Park. It has the most Christian electorate, and I'll use that word rather than Catholic, but it is predominantly Catholic, electorate in the country.
Yep.
I have the highest amount of Assyrian Christians from northern Iraq, so both Church of the East, all Churches of the East, most of them, but Church of the East, which are Orthodox, as well as Chaldean, which is Catholics from Iraq. I have Armenians, who are mostly Orthodox. I have a large South Sudanese community in north and southern Blacktown, but dominantly Catholic and Anglican. I have a large Tamil community, which is predominantly Hindu and Catholic. And of course, then I've got the Maltese and Grey Stains where I live, the Filipinos, and many others.
It's a fantastic place.
Fantastic.
Even if just because the food is, you never go out of it.
It's true.
So that's Hugh, and we've also got with us Andrew Zbik. Did I pronounce that correctly? Andrew, come and join us as well. Grab your microphone. Give him a warm welcome. Andrew, same questions for you. A little bit on your religious Christian background.
Yes, so I'm second generation Australian with a surname like Zbik. That's Polish heritage, and that naturally made me born into a Catholic family as well. So I was very fortunate growing up as a young child, attended St Mary's Catholic School in Rydalmere. So my parents still live in Rydalmere. And I think I was very fortunate to have those early years. I thought it was really interesting, in about year 10 we all drifted away from God. And I remember very clearly walking, I was in a very depressed state in year 10, there's challenges of growing up. I remember so clearly walking across the oval to get the bus at the end of school and going, what's the meaning of life, as you do in year 10? And I remember going, this whole thing about God, and going, it's a hard question, but there's something in me that I made a decision right there that I'm not going to ever discount God. I'm never going to throw him away, because there's something in me that realised there's something really big about having a faith. And I really put that in the too hard basket for a good 10 years. And in university, actually attended a forum on faith and values in politics called the National Student Leadership Forum, which is held down in Canberra. Someone nominated me to go. Met a girl. A few years later, we're friends. And a few years later, she reintroduced me to a faith, and she's now my wife. So, and I kind of joke because she grew up in a Baptist family. I grew up in a Catholic family, so we compromise in the middle, and we now attend an Anglican church.
Nice. And where are you in politics?
So I'm a councillor on Lane Cove Council, a Labor councillor on Lane Cove Council in Blue Ribbon, Liberal North Shore of Sydney. I was elected in 2017. I was the first elected Labor representative in the Lane Cove area for 73 years, and just got re-elected on the weekend.
So Labor's not in crisis there then. Yeah. So maybe we need to talk about the issue of the day, because I think people who are interested in Labor, I think, as I said with the Senator previously, in the run-up to the last election, it was the backwash from the straight from the same-sex marriage debate, and that still lingered on. But there were the overtones of the religious freedom issues going on. Now it's first and foremost. Let me ask you guys the question of the day. It's hustings. Let me ask you the question of the day. Should Christian schools, and this is the top voted question from the people here, so this is what everyone wants to know, should Christian schools have not just the right to teach the traditional values about gender and sexuality, which are, as you'll know, are not peripheral but core in traditional Christian belief, but also to insist that all their teachers and other employees uphold their values, not just with their lip, but with their life. That's the key issue of the day. What do you guys reckon?
I'll go first. I'm pretty straightforward. I mean, this isn't something new. We've been having this debate. Well, I first worked for the Catholic Church in the 90s. We were having the debate, we were being attacked and having the debate then, about the same type of issues. And the same groups that have brought us euthanasia more recently, and before that with the abortion debate, it's the same agenda. It really is. So to answer your question, yes, of course. I don't send my kids to a religious school so they can be taught other secular things. You know, it doesn't work that way. At the moment, the schools have the right to discriminate on their hiring and firing, as they should, as they have for decades. Simple as that. What is taught in those schools basically is what the parents have decided to send their schools to those schools to do. My girls go to St Anthony's at Kirrawee, where Deb went, just coincidence. But we made a conscious decision. Now, my wife's a Protestant, Huguenot descendant, French background, right? So we have some great debates. Yeah. But that's the history. She's very proud of it. And I'm very proud of that too. For our children, we made the conscious decision we wanted our children to go to a Catholic school because they teach social justice teaching. That's what it was about. That was the key thing, amongst other things. And sure, our daughters still have the secular understanding. We still take them to visit the Hindu temples and everything else. We do a lot of things. But we made a conscious decision as parents. And that needs to be respected by government. It needs to be respected by political parties and other people who don't have that faith. And so it's key, absolutely. And to be honest, I know you will have people within the Labor Party that will talk against what I've just said. And I've had the arguments with them. I've had arguments with moderate Liberals as well, and National Party, people. So it's not new, and certainly everyone fights with the Greens. But, that is how it is, and that is basically how it is in the Labor Party at a federal, state and council level.
That's quite forthright, Hugh, and I've got to know you, I'm not surprised. I'll come to centre in a minute. Andy?
Yeah, I think applying the reverse test, and this is where, again, member of the party, but things on same-sex marriage and this one of going, well, if someone has a civil wedding ceremony, we as Christians aren't running in there and saying you must, believe our values, even though you're doing something that comes from Christian tradition. So I think apply the reverse. And this is, again, discussion I've had with people just recently, even on pre-poll for local council, saying, well, we're not in there running into a civil ceremony demanding that you have and abide by a Christian belief. So on the reverse, exactly same as Hugh said, that's, I think, the importance of freedom of religion and freedom of choice we have in our country, that, if you choose to send your child to a Christian school, you'll have those teachings. So,
And the Senator's looking up in a book for a quote.
Well, I think it's very important that one of the things that we sought to do to give comfort to people who could be manipulated by media and misrepresentation is to make sure that in our national platform there is a statement of belief about Labor values with regard to faith. And we actually have in it a statement that is very, very closely aligned with the United Nations Universal Declaration on Human Rights, and it states everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion. And you can go in and have a look at that online. There's 3 different sections there. We've got a section about vilification in chapter 5, verses 43, I think, through to
45 and 46.
There you go. Yeah. It's there. But it's not a new thing. That is an old thing. Labor has had that at its core for a very, very long time. The whole country has had it at its core. But it's not just political parties now that are representing different views in the community. It's not just Labor. The Liberal Party have people within it who would read in the paper and laugh at a statement like, people who believe in the sky fairies don't have a place in our parliament.
Sure.
Right? We're all getting that.
Yeah.
Whatever faith tradition you're in. But I just go to one quote from the 1965 Second Vatican Council.
Sure.
And this is a statement that was issued then. It says, "The Church reproves as foreign to the mind of Christ any discrimination against men or harassment of them because of their race, colour, condition in life or religion. On the contrary, following in the footsteps of the Holy Apostle Peter and Paul, this sacred synod ardently implores the Christian faithful to maintain good fellowship among the nations," quoting 1 Peter 2:12, "and if possible to live for their part in peace with all men, so they may be truly sons of the Father who is in heaven." It's beautiful. The language of Vatican II gives voice to that in a faith language that meets with the challenges of our time to live and let live.
And it is a challenge. Can I be so bold to say, I'm not quite sure I heard a clear answer from you on the question, though, which is on that specific issue, do Christian schools nevertheless have, and Muslim schools and others, have the right to have those clear boundaries on those that they
Yes,
employ?
absolutely.
Absolutely.
And earlier I quoted what Tanya Plibersek said as the education shadow, the potential education for the minister, on the floor of Parliament. You can't get much more public, in Hansard, repeated ad nauseum. But we're still getting the question, so something's not right.
No, that's fine. So now I'm interested in this again because it seems to me this goes back to perhaps the underlying issue that I want to just keep pulling at the thread, because I think there's something there which lies behind what we're doing tonight, which is that you three are you're forthright on that issue, and yet nevertheless there seems to be some voices within the Labour Party which push in other directions on these issues quite loudly. Can I just give two examples and then ask you to comment on them? The first one is Penny Wong's ill-fated bill in November 2018, where actually it almost got to the point where, just on the language of the bill, that's the Sex Discrimination Amendment Bill 2018, where if passed, it would have, in some sense, limited free expression of traditional sexual morality in any teaching situation, which, as the lawyers told us, and I don't think they were being sensationalist, included that pulpit there and what we taught in Sunday schools on Sunday morning. I've got to tell you, when we saw that, I was almost resolved, if that bill ever passes, I know what I'm preaching on the next Sunday morning. But even more, you've got what's going on, and this is probably more pressing right now, and we can say that was 3 years ago, but right now in Victoria, your colleagues in the Labour Party are passing some pretty draconian stuff on sexual expression, while nobody wants this sort of forced reparation stuff. It's the point where if a young man or woman comes to me as a minister and says, I have same-sex attraction, that clearly doesn't line up to how I read biblical morality, and as the church has read it for 2,000 years. Would you pray with me over that issue? Because I want, for me, the experience that the scriptures hold out, which is some of you were, but now you've been changed by Jesus. That then becomes an offense for me even to kneel down, just bow my head and pray that prayer. So while you three are forthright, and we expect that from convinced Christians, there are voices very recently that push in very, very, almost want to criminalize those kinds of things. So is that not an issue for the Labour Party still?
Let me answer that, because as much as I appreciate what Deb's saying and Roy, isn't it, they're broad brush stuff, and it's federal. Let's go where the trenches are, which is the state.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, I've been, like, my colleagues and I have been fighting euthanasia for the last couple of years. Yeah. We fought the abortion fights.
Yep.
You know, it's great that Penny Wong brought that up. All respect for Penny, but went nowhere. And if it had brought it up, there would have been a hell of a fight. And the thing is about the history of the Labor Party, which Roy did, which was great, didn't really get into the minutiae, which is the states. Labor parties are based on states. Really, you don't care what the feds have to say half the time, because we fight the battles. This is where it matters. Now, the feds can say, we're going to give money for abortion if you do it, and the states can say, well, go away. We're not doing it. They can do that. But the battles that have been fought recently about faith have predominantly been on the state level, and they continue to be. When we war-gamed what was going to happen with euthanasia, and I'll use that word because it was a battle and it was a war, there was no way that legislation was going to get up as long as the government didn't give them the time to do it. Because how it worked as a private members, they only had an hour and a half every Thursday to debate the bill. If we just looked at it, how many people spoke on against abortion and for abortion, it would have taken them 3 years to debate that piece of legislation, as long as the government didn't fold. The government fell, right? It gave them all-day Fridays, 3 weeks in a row. As did the previous government, Gladys's government, with abortion. So let's be honest, this isn't a Labor Liberal thing when it comes to such things. In fact, one of the biggest lessons I learned in politics during the abortion debate, who the good guys were on both sides of politics.
Exactly.
Right? Liberal and Labor. And you know, it was the National Party who put up the euthanasia stuff last time. It's the National Party who drove it this time. So let's not paint it as Labor. Labor gets blamed for it, sure, because people like Penny Wong comes out with stuff from the left. Let me finish. So, yeah. Labor Party comes out with stuff like that. So that is key. But there is a problem throughout major political parties on who has the loudest voice. And often the Christian groups don't have it. It's simple as that. Whereas the more extreme groups, and I use that words, the more left-wing groups, whatever you want to use, what terminology you want to use, they do, time and again. The euthanasia debate, they lost it many times over the last 30 years. And they had learnt their lessons, they put significant resources in, and they didn't stop, and they kept going until eventually they ran over us. And we continue the battle, right, in the upper house now. So it's an ongoing and common thing.
Yes, the Liberals the right side of politics have brought in some of these contentious motions recently, but isn't it the fact that nevertheless it's Labour MPs who are voting more, the greater majority of Labour
look at the
MPs.
figure. That's just not true. That's the fallacy, right, of some of these arguments have been put up mostly by the Libs because, hey, it's good politics for them. Exactly. But you look at the euthanasia debate, look at the numbers. Labor and Liberal are the same. Right?
So here in New South Wales, the same. In Queensland...
So we didn't touch on Victoria.
Sure. And this is, again...
insanity across the border.
Insanity across the border.
Now, the reality is that the worst thing about a Labor Party MP is that you get basically tagged with Victorians.
Yeah.
Right? And the way some of the insanity that goes on in the Victorian Labor Party. I remember when a young man with the Ironworkers Union, or AWU as it eventually became, going to Victoria for my first time, meeting a group of metal workers, and they called me comrade, and they had a picture of Karl Marx on the wall. And it was just 1994. And I thought... oh, I've got to get out of this state. I don't belong here.
Have they not seen what happened 5 years ago?
It hasn't changed much. This is the insanity. A lot of the things, and I'll be critical, because I've been openly critical about some of the decisions of the Victorian government, as have a lot of Labor MPs in New South Wales and other states. Yep. But just like here, there's been leaders and others who I've disagreed with, which we argue with, because the reality is that politics is a clash of ideas. Good politics is. Yeah. And we live in a democracy. Yep. And so you need to have the numbers to be able to win your arguments. And you need to have the arguments, and that's the difficulty.
Well, so we're talking about the difference between different areas. Andy, let me then ask you, does the insanity, to quote the MP, the insanity over the border, does that trickle down to the local retail politics in Lane Cove?
I had a few questions in the last 2 weeks leading up to the election just on the weekend. One thing I found in my own church where, a lot of people have said to me when I first joined the church, well, how can you be a Christian and a member of the Labor Party? And we talk about these debates, and it's one thing I've always pointed out to people is that one of Labor's best strengths is also something that can be our Achilles heel. And I think the best example of that was at our state conference in 2018, where we had the debate on whether Scripture should be allowed in schools. And this is something that I love about the Labor Party. When we have a state conference or a federal conference, it is completely open to the public, the entire conference. So you do see some of the crazy motions that do get put up. And the problem with that is the media then go, and Christians, they saw a motion at the state Labor conference of trying to remove Scripture from schools. And understandably, a lot of Christians were distressed by this. And we debated it in the open, in our state conference, and I was there, and I remember Jihad Dib, who was the shadow education minister at the time, arguing so passionately why it is so important for both a heritage perspective but also a wholesome education perspective that we include Scripture in schools, and that the Labor Party should support that. And resoundingly, the Labor Party voted in New South Wales that Scripture has a place in schools. Yeah. Now, the thing I point out is the Liberal Party and the Greens do not have that open, transparent process in their parties, and that's where I think I spend a lot of time explaining to people that's why I love the Labor Party. But I think that's where it is our Achilles heel, because you see the warts in all our debate, which you don't see in the other parties.
We've been fighting these battles since the 50s, right, if not before, with the DLP and other groups like that. We were lucky in New South Wales that we had so many Christians in the Labor Party that we stood up for the communists and didn't split. My grandfather was very involved with the Railways Union, and others have told me, Dorry Shaw, if you know who he was in the Ironworkers, he told me the story of how they all went up to meet with Archbishop Jimmy Carroll, right? 1951, I think it was. And they said, look, what should we do? Santa Maria's split down in Victoria, the Queenslanders are going, what should we do? And Carroll said to them this. He says, as men of faith, you've got to stay in the Labor Party and fight, because that's the only way we're going to win. Right? And they did that, and that then became a situation where people of faith led against then the communists, and it's progressed to other things since then. But they're still there. They are still there, those people. The problem we've had, I think, is that our voices haven't been as coordinated as in the past, and a lot of change has gone on. And the last federal election, it was pretty clear we didn't have the voice we should have had.
Well, so it seems to me that there are just some absolutely core issues around the life and the gender issues where our religious minorities go this far but no further, and they perceive Labour as being on the wrong side on those issues, the wrong side on same-sex marriage, the wrong side on abortion, the wrong side, dare I say it, on euthanasia in terms of some of the voices that they're hearing. So no matter how appealing the other issues may be, such as immigration, welfare, all this other stuff, this just is the blocker, it's the defeater to win their vote back.
Can I just say that in the question, you have embedded the perception that is the problem that keeps being repeated and repeated, and Hugh's given you the numbers of the reality here in New South Wales, and it still doesn't interrupt that narrative, right? So that narrative keeps being repeated and it's not accurate.
Andy?
This is a question I'm said to a few people in my church, even my growth group.
Sure.
And if we think about same-sex marriage and euthanasia and sexuality, for most people it's such a percentage, it's a small percentage of the population that it actually impacts. So where I live, it's a very easy issue to get rolled up about. Now let's talk about actually making a difference to homelessness and the core social justice issues that we align so strongly with in the Labor Party. That's actually hard. That's actually where you've got to get off your butt and do some heavy lifting. And what frustrates me as a Christian is I see other Christians very easily upset by those big issues. But I can tell you when, we live in one of the best countries in the world, and I definitely live in one of the wealthiest parts of Sydney. Let's talk about those heavy issues. No one's lifting a finger, quite frankly. And that's a challenge back to Christians of going, what's really main issues here? We've been distracted.
You're absolutely right, Andy, and let's think about this, okay? You've got a situation where, and we've talked about this now in circles, where abortion got put up by a Liberal government. Euthanasia was permitted to be debated by a Liberal government. The numbers were squared as far as the vote goes. The National Party led it most of the time. So it isn't the Labor Party just, right? There's a certain element on both sides of parties which control it. But the thing that just was the hardest thing for me as an MP in the last year, it was watching 50 Tamil families in my electorate who got COVID, were in lockdown, but because they were on bridging visas, they couldn't get any government support. So the local churches stood up, the local Hindu groups stood up, the local Tamil groups, my family, others, right, to look after them. Because this government Liberal government has a policy to give them nothing. Now, I don't know how you live your faith or what you do, but certainly going right back, it's about looking after people like that, the most vulnerable in our community. And if you want to make a decision on where you're going to vote, look at the party that can actually do that the most, that actually will do in its actions, which will help the most. Neither party is perfect, right? But the question is, what are you doing in your faith to make sure that the world's a better place and you're working and glorifying God in your everyday action?
Elevator pitch. Is there a future for Christians in Labor?
Absolutely. No political party owns God, and I think this is the one thing Christians actually is quite great. Christians can span the political spectrum. So absolutely we need Christians in the Labor Party.
Thanks. Hugh?
There's Christians in the Labor Party now. And, the reality is there are a number, quite a lot, different faith groups, different beliefs. We argue with each other. We agree with each other on things. Very much there. And I think it is very key that Christians join political parties. I would suggest you join the Labor Party because for me, I can see in the platform and the actions and what we believe in, I can see that social teaching is so important. And the way of doing that, to raising the voice and to making a real difference, is by activism in a political party.
Senator?
We have more comfortable seats than the ones that you've been sitting on for all of this time. We have all kinds of seats, and among you there could be somebody who is the face of a community and is the voice of a community who wants to stand up for the community and make our country, our great country, a better country. And there are amongst you people who are fortified for the battle of ideas by your faith. And our rich multicultural, multi-faith democracy is enriched by your presence in the Parliament, in the Labor Party. We need not to be people of faith seeking the Holy Grail and living within the walls of our church and our community. We need to be the light in the world. We need your light in our Labor Party to bring your faith to the conversations, because that is just like a powerhouse of passion for others. And we want to manifest that in fair and equitable access to housing, to health, responsibly to manage money in the interests of all, but particularly with an option for the poor. So if that's you, you belong with us. And we've got the doors wide open. Thanks.
Well, just clap. The question of tonight is there a place for Christians in Labour? Another contentious topic, but someone who thinks that there is, and actually without whom tonight could not have happened, and who sat patiently by while we've done all this, is Mike Southern. Mike, why don't you come and join me, and we'll talk a little bit about your organisation. You're here, and we did this together with an organisation called Christians for Labour. I think we've got a slide to go up on the screen. There it is.
Yeah, that's
very red. Very red. Can't mistake what you're about. What is Christians for Labour?
Yeah, so Christians for Labour, we are a network of Christians in and around the Labour Party. Some of us are members of the party, some of us aren't. But all of us want to see a Labour Party that engages well with Christians, that has a strong Christian voice inside it, and also a party that can develop wise and good policy which would make Christians want to vote for it.
So we've already got some strong Christian voices in Labour. You heard 3 of them tonight. So why bother doing this?
Well, we need a lot more. So when I started, I've been in ministry for about 12 years, and I joined the party about 5 years ago, and the first thing I did was I wanted to know where were the Christians so I could network with them. Where's that network? Where's the group? You know, in school you had your lunchtime group, at uni you had university group and City Bible Forum doing things, but there was nothing. There was no way to find the other Christians, to fellowship with them, to connect with them. I couldn't find anything. So we started something. The idea of Christians for Labour is that it is that place where Christians can have fellowship. As Hugh was saying, we can disagree on issues, we can argue with issues, but we can know that we are brothers and sisters in Christ. And also by existing, it then means that people who are not yet members of the party can actually feel like they could join, and could find a home, not have the experience that Deb had. Although I have to say, I did not have that experience when I joined. I was very, very lovingly welcomed by the branch secretary at my branch, who was a Catholic and who is here tonight, Marianne Stewart. And so I've had a great experience, but so many people fear joining the party. But if you've met other Christians who are already part of the party, if you know what it's like, that's when you can start taking the next step.
Is this just about party membership then? Or?
No, as I said, so there's 140-ish members, 75 are party members, so half of our people are not party members.
Oh.
And we're all about the conversation, as it says on the slide, helping Christians and the ALP talk. Because I do think that Christians and Labour have lost the art of speaking to each other for a number of reasons. We speak past each other. We don't understand the language that the other side is, or the group is using. We don't hear well what's being said to us. And so part of what we're trying to do is help foster that conversation so that it is a good conversation, a heard conversation. And that has involved hosting meetings where the ministers of a local electorate met with the Labor members. We want to do a lot more of that. We want to do a lot more of helping Christians, whether or not they vote for Labor, Christians to speak well with Labor and Labor to be able to hear well and speak well back.
Okay, so don't even have to be a Labour Party member.
Not at all.
Just if I'm interested in the conversation.
Yes.
And I think Labour, even if I just think Labour need to start hearing more Christian voices.
Yes.
That might be a useful thing to do. So, Mike, any events coming? Coming up soon?
So yeah, the past 18 months have been fairly rough for us for some strange reason.
Yeah.
So we've run Zoom events up until now, but in the new year we're planning to run local events in a few key places around Sydney. Probably one up the coast, one down at Wollongong, where we can actually get together as human beings physically and meet each other and encourage each other. We are also going to be running Zoom events. We've got some great, exciting speakers and thinkers lined up through the year to challenge our thinking about faith and politics and policy. And that's what we want to do, is be building on a fellowship and building this network.
Thanks. And Mike, you'll be around afterwards as well to talk to anybody that's interested in that.
And if you want to join,
Yep.
christiansforlabour.org, and there's a great big join now button. It's very easy. As I said, don't have to be part of the party, but that way you'll get our newsletter, you'll get updates and information about where the events are happening, and you'll be able to get involved in the conversation.
And Mike, thank you for your hard work in making tonight happen as well. Mike's behind the scenes. I've been up front tonight, but Mike behind the scenes has been making that happen as well. Thank you very much, Mike. Take care, mate.